It started on a quiet Sunday afternoon, the kind of day where everything feels calm on the surface, but something's stirring underneath. I was in the kitchen, humming to myself, wiping down the counter, when I felt that familiar shift in the air, the kind of feeling you get when you know someone's watching you. I turned around, and there he was with my stepson, standing in the doorway, silent, eyes locked on mine. There was nothing unusual at first glance. But something about the way he looked at me made my heart beat faster, made me feel like the ground wasn't quite steady beneath my feet. We've always had a good relationship, friendly, respectful, nothing ever crossed a line. I married his father 3 years ago, and from the start, I tried to be supportive, not overbearing. He was a quiet kid back then, still carrying some scars from his parents' divorce. Over time, he opened up to me. We'd talk about school, girls, life, and I'd always remind him that I wasn't trying to replace his mother. I was just there, in his corner. But lately things had felt different. He'd started lingering in conversations longer than necessary. His compliments, innocent on the surface, sometimes landed with a weight I didn't know what to do with. A comment on a dress I wore, a lingering glance when I was distracted, a question about my day that sounded a little too curious. I told myself I was imagining it. That it was harmless. But that afternoon, something changed. He stepped closer, slowly, as if he wasn't entirely sure what he was doing, or maybe he was. His gaze never left mine. And I should have said something. I should have broken the silence, reminded him who I was. But I didn't. Maybe I was frozen. Maybe I was confused. Or maybe, deep down, I didn't want to stop him. You see, things between his father and me hadn't been the same in a long time. What started off passionate and full of laughter had slowly dulled into routine. We barely talked unless it was about bills or groceries. He worked late, traveled often, and when he was home, it felt like he wasn't really present. We were sharing a house, not a life. I'd grown lonely, even if I didn't want to admit it. And loneliness, it can make you see things differently. So when my stepson reached out and gently touched my hand, so soft, so tentative, it wasn't just a shock. It was a jolt that lit something in me I thought had gone numb. I pulled away, told him he was confused, that he didn't know what he was doing. He apologized, nodded, walked away. But the damage, or maybe the spark, was already there. Neither of us could pretend it hadn't happened. For days after, the tension was impossible to ignore. Every moment alone together felt like a pause in time, like the air was thick with words we weren't saying. I avoided him. He tried to act normal. But one night, when the house was quiet and the lights were low, it happened again. Only this time, he didn't just touch my hand. He looked at me, like really looked at me, and kissed me. Not like a boy unsure of himself. But like a man who'd made up his mind. And I didn't stop him. I know how it sounds. I know how complicated this is. I never imagined I'd find myself in a situation like this, caught between what's right and what's real, between loyalty and something I can't even explain. I'm not proud. But I can't lie either. Because what happened next, it changed everything. And that's where the story begins. What followed that moment shattered every boundary I thought I had. It wasn't just about a kiss. It wasn't just about desire. It was about something deeper, something no one saw coming. But before I tell you what happened next, I need you to understand how we got here. Because this story, it's not just about infidelity. It's about emotional emptiness, human connection, and the choices we make when our hearts get ahead of our minds. So stay with me. Because the next part is where everything unravels. It didn't start with a kiss. It started long before that, quietly, almost invisibly. If I had to trace it back, I think it began the moment I started feeling invisible in my own home. My husband, Mark, wasn't a bad man. He was just tired. Worn down by work, by life, maybe even by the weight of our marriage. I tried. I really did. I cooked, I planned date nights, I asked him how he was doing. But his answers got shorter. His attention more divided. He was always glued to his laptop, or on conference calls late into the night. The warmth we once shared had turned cold, and slowly, I stopped expecting anything more than silence. That's when I started noticing James differently. My stepson. He had grown into a man almost overnight. Tall, confident in a quiet way, with eyes that seemed to see right through me. He wasn't a kid anymore. He was 21, back from college for the summer, and somehow, being around him felt easier than being around Mark. I know how it sounds. But when you're starved for affection, even the smallest gestures feel enormous. It was subtle at first. We'd talk in the kitchen while I cleaned up. He'd help me with groceries, bring me tea without being asked. He laughed at my jokes, remembered little things I'd said in passing. And I'd tell myself, he's just being sweet. That's all. But somewhere inside, I knew something was shifting. I just didn't want to face it. There was this one night that still plays in my head like a scene from a film. A storm was rolling in. The power flickered, and the house felt heavy with quiet. Mark was out of town again, some business trip he barely mentioned. James and I sat in the living room, talking about nothing and everything. Music playing softly in the background. And then, out of nowhere, he looked at me and said, "You don't seem happy anymore." I froze. No one had said that to me. Not even myself. "I'm fine," I said quickly, brushing it off. But he didn't buy it. He just watched me, like he knew there was more. I remember getting up, pretending to tidy the bookshelf, just to avoid that gaze. But even then, I felt it, this pull between us, a tension that wasn't supposed to be there. From that night on, things felt different. Charged. And even though I tried to keep my distance, there were too many moments that brought us closer. The night he kissed me wasn't sudden, it was the result of 100 quiet moments stacked on top of each other. A slow build-up we both pretended not to notice until we couldn't anymore. But nothing felt clear after that. Everything was tangled. I wasn't sleeping well. I'd catch myself watching the door when I heard him coming home. I felt guilt, confusion, and something else I wasn't ready to name. James didn't bring it up again. He acted normal. But every time our eyes met, it was like we were both waiting for the next move, the next slip, the next chance. What made it worse was that Mark had no idea. He called once during dinner, and I couldn't even look at James while I answered the phone. I could feel him watching me, hearing me lie so easily, so smoothly, as if nothing was wrong. But everything was wrong. And the truth was, something had already changed. We had crossed a line. And though nothing more had happened, the silence between us was louder than anything we'd said out loud. I kept thinking, was this really happening? Or had I just imagined it all? But deep down, I knew the answer. And that's what terrified me most. Because once something starts, even if you want to stop it, you can't always control where it goes. The days that followed felt like walking a tightrope, where every step could tip everything over. I kept going through the motions, cooking dinner, folding laundry, smiling when Mark called, but it all felt hollow. My thoughts were never really in the room. They were always somewhere else, usually circling back to James. It wasn't just about what happened. It was about everything we hadn't said since. James wasn't avoiding me, but he wasn't pushing anything either. He was careful, almost too careful, like he knew that any wrong move would blow everything open. And I noticed things, how he watched me when he thought I wasn't looking, how his jaw tightened when Mark touched my back or kissed my cheek in front of him. The silence between James and his father had grown too. I couldn't tell if it was guilt, resentment, or something deeper, but they weren't connecting like they used to. At one point, I even wondered if Mark could sense it. Not the details, but the shift. He asked if I was okay, mentioned that I seemed distant, tired. I blamed work, stress, hormones, whatever excuse I could come up with to shut down the conversation. But I saw the doubt flicker in his eyes. He wasn't a fool. He just didn't want to believe what he might have been feeling. One evening, I found myself alone with James again, in the backyard. The sun was setting, and the sky was streaked in orange and purple. We stood in silence, the kind that says too much. He finally broke it. "You don't have to be afraid of me," he said, softly. "I'd never hurt you." That moment stayed with me. Not because I didn't believe him, but because a part of me already felt hurt. Torn. Caught between two lives. I started questioning everything, my marriage, my choices, even my role in this house. I wondered if James was confusing affection with something else, or if I was the one blurring the lines. The emotional pull between us was growing stronger, but so was the fear. I couldn't tell what scared me more, getting caught, or wanting it to continue. Then came something unexpected. A message. From someone I hadn't heard from in years, James's mother. She was coming into town. Wanted to meet for coffee. Said she needed to talk. I stared at the message for a long time, heart pounding, not sure if it was coincidence or fate. But something told me, whatever she had to say, it wasn't going to make things easier. And just like that, another layer of tension folded into the mess we were already in. The day James's mother arrived, the air in the house felt thick, like something was about to snap. I hadn't seen her in years, just photos, vague stories, memories shared around the dinner table. She was striking, even more than I expected. Confident, graceful, the kind of woman who walks into a room and quietly takes control. When we met at the cafe, she smiled politely, but there was something in her eyes, something sharp, like she already knew more than she was saying. We sat down, made small talk for a while. Then she leaned in, lowered her voice, and said, "James talks about you a lot." I froze. My hands curled around the coffee cup. "He's been different lately," she continued, watching me carefully. "I know my son. When something's off with him, I feel it in my bones." I didn't respond. I couldn't. I felt like my heart was thudding so loudly the whole place could hear it. She didn't accuse me of anything. But her tone, it was layered. As if she was giving me a chance to tell the truth, or at least flinch. That night, I couldn't sleep. I laid awake, watching the shadows move across the ceiling. James hadn't said anything about her visit. Neither had Mark. But I could feel something shifting. Like we were running out of time, like whatever we were hiding was starting to show. The next evening, the storm returned, literally and figuratively. Rain battered the windows, thunder rolled in the distance, and the house felt like it was holding its breath. Mark had gone upstairs early, tired again, oblivious. I walked into the kitchen to find James standing there, wet from the rain, eyes burning with something he wasn't bothering to hide anymore. "We need to talk," he said. His voice was low, steady. "I can't keep pretending this isn't real." And just like that, everything I'd been trying to hold back came rushing to the surface. But before I could respond, we both heard it. A sound from behind us. A voice. And in that instant, I knew someone else had heard everything. I turned around slowly, my breath caught in my throat, heart pounding so loudly it drowned out the rain outside. And there, standing at the edge of the hallway, was Mark. His expression was unreadable but blank, almost too calm. But his eyes, they were locked on James. And then on me. He hadn't just heard part of the conversation. He'd heard enough. For a moment, no one said a word. Time stopped. The air was thick with everything we'd tried to keep buried. James opened his mouth, but Mark raised a hand. "Don't," he said, his voice low, tight. "I want to hear it from her." He didn't yell. He didn't lose control. That made it worse. The way he stood there, cold, measured, it felt like something inside him had already snapped. I tried to speak, but I didn't even know where to begin. What could I say? That it was a mistake? That it didn't mean anything? That would be a lie. And he'd know it. The tension was unbearable. James took a step forward, but Mark's glare froze him in place. Not another word, he said, sharper this time. Then came the twist I hadn't seen coming. Mark didn't storm out. He didn't throw accusations. He walked over to the table, opened a drawer, and pulled out a small envelope. I wasn't going to bring this up yet, he said, sliding it across the counter. But since we're all being honest now, I looked down. It was a printed copy of a private investigator's report. Photos. Dates. Notes. He'd known something was off long before tonight. He'd been watching. Following. Waiting. And that changed everything. Because now, it wasn't just about secrets and temptation. Now it was about consequences. And the storm outside was nothing compared to what had just started inside this house. The envelope lay between us like a bomb waiting to go off. My hands trembled as I opened it. Page after page of evidence, photos of James and me, not kissing or touching, but too close. Moments I thought were private, captured from angles I never noticed. Notes about phone calls, late-night conversations, even the cafe meeting with his ex-wife. Mark had been watching longer than I realized. I didn't want to believe it, he said quietly. I wanted to be wrong. I finally found my voice, barely above a whisper. Nothing happened, not the way you think. He laughed, bitter, tired. No. But it was going to. And that's enough. James stepped forward, jaw tight. I care about her. More than you ever did. That broke something. Mark slammed his hand on the counter, voice rising for the first time. You think this is love? You've wrecked this family. It all came spilling out then, my loneliness, the silence in our marriage, the growing distance that neither of us had been brave enough to face. For a moment, Mark softened. Why didn't you just tell me? And just when I thought we were unraveling it, when everything painful had finally been laid bare, Mark delivered the final blow. I've been seeing someone too, he said. Longer than you've known. The room spun. I looked at James, then back at Mark. The truth was, none of us had been honest. Not really. This wasn't just a story of infidelity, it was about everything left unsaid, everything we tried to bury under routines and silence. And in the end, it wasn't the kiss that tore us apart. It was everything that led to it. After that night, the house felt different, quieter, but heavier, like the truth had settled into the walls and wasn't leaving anytime soon. Mark packed a small bag the next morning. He didn't yell, didn't ask for explanations. He just said he needed time. And I didn't stop him. Maybe we both knew the damage went deeper than a single mistake. It was years of disconnection, silence, pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. James left too, a few days later. Not with anger, but with a quiet understanding that whatever was between us couldn't continue. Not here. Not like this. He said he needed to figure out who he was without the confusion, without the lines we both crossed. And I didn't argue. I knew it was the right choice, even if it hurt. I stayed behind, in the same house, surrounded by the echoes of everything that happened. I thought a lot during those weeks alone, about marriage, loyalty, and the emptiness we often ignore until it becomes too loud. What happened wasn't just about betrayal. It was about broken communication, emotional neglect, and the slow unraveling of connection. Eventually, Mark and I met again. Not to fix things, but to face the ending with honesty. We agreed on a quiet separation. No bitterness, just truth. James kept his distance. And I let him. Some stories don't end with a perfect resolution. But they do end with clarity. And this one? It was messy, complicated, and real. A true infidelity story, not about passion or scandal, but about everything we lose when we stop really seeing each other. It was the kind of night that starts out ordinary, one of those casual dinner parties my husband and I had grown used to hosting. The laughter was soft, the music played low in the background, and wine flowed a little too freely for a Wednesday. Our living room glowed with warm lights and the scent of roasted garlic and spice from the kitchen lingered in the air. There were just a few close friends over, nothing extravagant, just good company, shared stories, and the comfort of familiarity. But if I had known how that night would end, I might have asked everyone to leave a little earlier. My husband's best friend, Marcus, had arrived late but made up for it with his usual charm and infectious energy. He was the kind of man who turned heads without trying, tall, confident, and always perfectly timed with his jokes and smiles. We'd known him for years, long before my husband and I even got married. He was practically family at this point. But something about him that night felt different. Or maybe, something about me had started to change. My husband, David, had been distant lately. Not in an obvious way, no raised voices or slammed doors, but in small things. He'd stopped asking how my day went. He'd fall asleep with his phone clutched in his hand. Conversations over dinner had grown shorter. And while I tried to brush it off as work stress or just the natural ebb and flow of marriage, there was a growing silence between us that even laughter from friends couldn't cover. As the night wore on, the guests slowly trickled out, and David disappeared into the bedroom, saying he had an early meeting the next day. I stayed behind to clean up. Or maybe I stayed behind because Marcus was still there. He offered to help with the dishes, and I didn't say no. We talked, really talked, for the first time in what felt like ages. He asked how I was doing, not just the polite kind of asking, but the kind where you know the person is actually listening. I won.